There comes a silence so sharp, it severs the lie we've mistaken for life. Not with violence, but with the precision of unbearable honesty. And if you found yourself here weary, unmotivated, disillusioned, estranged from the joy they told you would follow effort, you are not transforming, you are collapsing. The illusions are shattering, not to reveal a higher truth, but to show there never was one, only the dull ache of reality. This is not weakness. This is awakening. The world does not reward the awake. It pities them, diagnoses them, sometimes crucifies them, but underneath the confusion, they carry something sacred, the wound that sees. You begin to feel it when the music stops moving you, when praise grows hollow, when the chase becomes insult, not inspiration. You once believed in the scaffolding they gave you: success, romance, acclaim, accumulation, but now the scaffolding sways and the heights make you sick. You are not malfunctioning, you are dehypnotizing. There is no applause for this, no manual, no certificate of completion. There is only the slow death of illusion and the birth of a gaze that cannot unsee. This world built its theater on distraction. It taught you that to be good is to perform, to be desirable is to shrink, to be happy is to consume. And so you obeyed, like most do, until obedience began to rot from the inside. And now you sit in silence longer than you used to. You scroll slower. You avoid small talk, not from pride, but from exhaustion. You've tasted too many hollow joys. Now you crave bitter truths. This is the first sign. The outer world no longer charms you, because something within has begun to stir, something tired of being lied to. You do not need to be fixed. You need to be left alone to decompose the false self that kept you asleep. And yes, it hurts. Because the mind confuses familiarity with safety. Even suffering can feel like home if it mimics your past. But the pain now is not the same as before. It does not crush you, it cleanses you. It is not punishment, it is purification. Look closely. This pain has no cure, no dignity, no lesson. It is not a mirror, it is the truth. It is the quiet but relentless confirmation that to exist is to suffer, and to awaken is merely to suffer consciously. And this is the second sign. The suffering that used to shatter you now strips you gently, ruthlessly of what was never yours to carry. Your roles, your masks, your borrowed ambitions. The job you hated but defended. The relationship that mirrored your wounds, not your worth. The habits that numbed instead of healed. They fall away now, don't they? Like old skin, like scaffolding after the structure is sound. You grieve them, even as they suffocate you. That's the paradox of waking up. You mourn what you no longer want. And in this mourning, you meet the truth, that most of what you called your life was architecture built to avoid yourself. This is not depression, it is disillusionment. The veil is thinning, you are glimpsing the real. But beware, the world does not like the disillusioned. They scare the sleepers, they interrupt the script. So they will call you unstable. They will urge you back into distraction. They will mistake your solitude for sadness, your quiet for weakness. Silence is not a space for truth. It is what remains when language fails to conceal the futility of desire. In silence, we do not discover meaning. We endure its absence. And this is the third sign. You've stopped performing. You no longer laugh just to be liked. You no longer say yes to avoid discomfort. You no longer dress your wounds as wisdom. This is terrifying, isn't it? To disappoint those who applauded your mask, to feel alone among the many. But it is the holy loneliness, the sacred disconnection before true connection is possible. And here, in this silence, you begin to hear things you forgot how to hear: the tremble in your own voice, the heaviness in your chest, the questions you drowned in distraction. Why am I here? Who am I without the chase? What part of me was never mine? This is where many run, back to noise, back to numbness, back to performance. But not you, you stay. You sit in the storm, not to be heroic, but because you're too tired to run anymore. And so, the fourth sign arises. A strange peace begins to emerge beneath the ache. Not the peace of pleasure, but the peace of no longer needing to pretend. The war within slows. The inner critic loses its fangs. You do not forgive. You forget not out of virtue, but from weariness. Even resentment, like desire, eventually decays into apathy. This is not nobility. It is exhaustion. You understand, finally, that others are asleep too, not evil, not enlightened, just conditioned, just afraid. and you see your reflection in them. You begin to bow, not to gods or dogmas, but to the mystery that moves all things. You no longer need to be right, you need to be real. And that is the fifth sign. You begin to see beauty again, but not the kind that seduces, the kind that reveals. The crack in a wall, the tear in an eye, the dying leaf that still holds the sun. Not the beauty of perfection, but the beauty of presence. And now, you feel it. The weight lifts not all at once, but in waves. Not because life got easier, but because your resistance softened. And you see what the world tried so hard to hide, that freedom was never the absence of pain, but the refusal to be owned by it. You are not weak, you are remembering. And that remembering will ruin your old life, but it will save your soul. You will lose comfort, and find only discomfort stripped of distraction. You will lose the crowd's applause, and be left not with authenticity, but with isolation, the price of seeing clearly. You will lose people, and you will not gain. You will be emptied, not to be filled again, but to be left bare. What you called authenticity is merely the absence of distraction. And that is the great exchange. The dream of the ego for the truth of the soul. Do not rush it. Do not explain it. Do not market it. Just walk it, barefoot, bleeding if you must, but walk it. Because on the other side of illusion is not heaven but something far rarer, reality. And in reality, even suffering becomes sacred. Even silence becomes song. Even you, weary, broken, stripped of illusions, arrive not at awakening, but at the recognition that there was nothing to become, only to see. And what you now see cannot be unseen, that life, in its rawest form, is not a journey upward, but a quiet descent into the absurd. And so the illusion begins to die not with a scream, but with a sigh, the kind of sigh that escapes when a soul finally stops pretending that the noise was music, that the race was noble, that the mask still fit. The collapse is quiet, as all truths are. It does not seek spectacle, it seeks stillness. For in stillness, one sees what movement only obscures, that most of what you once pursued was not born of desire, but of imitation. You did not want the things you chased. You wanted what they promised to silence. The gnawing, the hollow, the aching sense that something essential was missing and that you had to earn your right to feel whole. But nothing real demands your performance. Nothing eternal asks for your disguise. The soul, unlike the world, cannot be bribed. It will not trade presence for praise. And so it rebels gently, then violently. It disrupts, it disorients, it removes your appetite for that which once thrilled. This is not regression, it is remembrance. You are not losing energy, you are losing illusion. And the world, built upon it, now feels foreign. Like a stage long abandoned, where the lights still flicker but the script no longer seduces. This is the sorrow of awakening, to see clearly what others still worship, to stand in a crowd and feel the absence of belonging. And yet, this exile is divine. For in solitude, you meet yourself. Not the self you curated for approval, but the self that whispers in quiet moments, the one who never clapped when you lied to survive. Yes, detachment begins here, not as a strategy, but as an inevitability. For what once held your loyalty now feels like betrayal. You no longer need to be understood, you long only to be true. And this truth is not loud. It has no slogans, no rewards. It is a cold flame, quiet, unwavering, that burns through every falsehood you inherited as identity. Suffering sharpens the eye. It trains you to see the architecture of deception, not just in society but in yourself, in the way you begged for crumbs and called it love, in the way you wore exhaustion like a badge of honor, in the way you confused stimulation with meaning. Detachment, then, is not a rejection of life but a rejection of illusion, of the idea that happiness is out there, waiting, if only you become more, do more, earn more. The lie was never that joy exists. The lie was that it could be purchased. Now, your hands are empty. And in this emptiness, there is no clarity, only the absence of delusion. No meaning, no lesson. Just the echo of what no longer deceives. The knowledge that you do not need to add to yourself, only to remove what is not you. And this removal is agony. It is not poetic. It is not graceful. It is a stripping raw, cold, absolute. You lose your language. You lose your laughter. You lose your faith in the narratives that once gave you a reason to wake up. But what dies is not you, it is what you mistook for you. The persona, the product, the performer. And beneath it all, a silence remains. Not the silence of absence, but of essence. It does not entertain, it does not flatter, it simply is. And in this being, you encounter something the world cannot sell: peace that has no cause, and therefore cannot be taken. Here, in the ashes of ambition, something sacred grows. Not purpose, but presence. Not direction, but depth. Not answers, but a willingness to dwell in the unknowing. You begin to walk slower, not from wisdom, but weariness. You speak less, because language no longer hides the futility. And you listen, not to understand, but because the silence has become heavier than sound. The world continues to shout urgency, identity, ideology, but it no longer commands you. For you have learned to sit with yourself, even in silence, even in sorrow. And in that sitting, you discover the most subversive truth of all, that nothing outside of you was ever real enough to complete you. Not the lover, not the title, not the dream. They were mirrors, some cracked, some clear, pointing always to the unfillable hunger within. And now, you stop trying to fill it. You learn to sit beside it, to regard your hunger as holy, to regard your suffering as sacred. Not because it feels good, but because it is real, because it is yours, because it has never lied to you. And this, at last, is freedom. Not the freedom of pleasure, but the freedom of no longer needing to pretend. You are not ascending. You are descending into the depths of yourself, where truth does not shine, but glows with a soft, eternal ache. A place where the soul does not sing, but weeps, and in weeping, is washed clean of every borrowed hope. You begin to see that all you ever ran from was the ache of being the weight of existing without illusion. The ego calls it emptiness, but it is not empty. It is vast. It is unclaimed. It is the space where your true self waits, not with promises, but with presence. The world fears this space, so it fills it with noise, idols, goals, movements. But you, having tasted the silence, no longer fear it. You begin to see that silence was never your enemy. It was your forgotten homeland. You do not crave explanations anymore. You crave authenticity, not the curated version, but the raw one, the one that cries without translation, the one that loses without excuse, the one that wakes at 3 a.m. and dares to feel the full weight of its loneliness without flinching. This is the sorrowful miracle of waking up. You stop bargaining with pain. You let it be. You stop dressing it up. You sit with it as you would a dying friend, gently, quietly, with no agenda but love. And this tenderness, this raw allowance of sorrow, reveals something no pleasure ever could, that suffering, even when faced without resistance, does not open doors. It closes them. What remains is not strength, but resignation, the quiet surrender to what can neither be escaped nor redeemed. You begin to live without the armor, not because it was taken, but because you chose to set it down. You realize that nothing real can be protected. It can only be surrendered to. The soul does not need protection. It needs exposure. Exposure to truth, to grief, to the holy terror of being awake in a world that prefers sedation. There is no triumph here, no breakthrough. Just the slow erosion of falsehood until all that remains is what you've always been beneath the performance. A being who feels. A being who sees. A being who no longer runs. And in this stillness, you begin to notice something terrifying and beautiful. You are not improving. You are unbecoming. This is not a path of gain, but of loss. Not of building, but of burning. You burn the need to be right. You burn the need to be adored. You burn the ladder you once climbed, realizing it led only to repetition. You do not ascend, you dissolve. And what remains after the dissolution is not some transcendent light, but the quiet gaze of one who has stopped pretending. This gaze is not romantic. It is not marketable. It does not promise healing. It simply sees. It sees the broken as sacred. It sees the anxious as awake. It sees the lost as free from the prison of maps. And in this seeing, the need to fix disappears. You stop fixing, not out of wisdom, but exhaustion. You do not love through wounds, you endure them, because they remain. What you called love was merely the will's desperate plea to momentarily forget its torment. But now, remembrance is all that remains. Because of them, as if pain were the language through which truth is finally spoken. You no longer worship happiness, you honor aliveness. And aliveness includes sorrow, it includes boredom, It includes the strange, quiet despair that comes when you realize life has no final revelation, only deepening questions. And yet, you walk on. Not with a goal, but with reverence. Each step becomes a prayer. Each breath, an unspoken agreement to remain present with what is, no matter how much it hurts. And yes, it still hurts. But now, the hurt has no agenda. It is not a curse. It is not karma. It is not even a lesson. It is life. And you let it be. You stop dissecting it. You stop demanding a reason. You let sorrow sit beside you, like an old companion who no longer needs to speak. And in that silence a kind of grace arises, not given, not earned, simply seen. The grace of being, without needing to be anything more. And so you discover the quietest truth of all, that life does not owe you meaning, but it does offer you the chance to witness the crumbling, the longing, the small, unnoticed acts of beauty that survive the fire. There is a wisdom that lives only in the ruins, a clarity that cannot be found while things are still intact. Only when the scaffolding collapses, only when the beliefs have rotted through, only then do you begin to see with eyes unclouded. This clarity does not come as light, it comes as shadow. It comes not to uplift you, but to ground you, to press your forehead against the dust and whisper, "This is you, too." You, in the hunger. You, in the silence. You, in the ache that refuses to heal because it was never a wound, it was the doorway. And now you stand at that door, not with pride, but with reverence. You know too much to be arrogant. You've lost too much to be naive. There are no affirmations that work here, no manifesting, no mantras, only breath, only presence, only the willingness to stay with the unanswered question. Because the question itself is sacred. And it is here, stripped of answers, that you stop needing to be seen. You stop performing for God. You stop performing for those who left. You stop performing even for yourself. You just breathe. And that breath, raw and real, becomes your first act of worship. Not to a deity, not to a doctrine, but to reality, to what is. You begin to bow to the ordinary, the chipped mug, the flicker of a candle, the sound of your own heartbeat in a sleepless night. And in this bowing, you find yourself lowered into the deepest truth, that you were never here to transcend suffering. You were here to touch it, taste it, carry it, and somehow, through it, become real. Not good, not whole, not healed, just real. And reality does not shimmer. It does not seduce. It does not rescue. It waits. And when you finally stop fleeing, it opens its arms not to comfort you, but to include you. Because you were never separate. Your grief is not a malfunction. It is the echo of everything you've had to leave behind to survive. Your fatigue is not laziness. It is the weight of carrying what was never yours. Your numbness is not failure. It is the mercy of a soul protecting itself from the violence of pretending. So stop pretending. There is nothing more to become. There is only this moment, vast, unpolished, quietly alive. And in this moment, you do not need to fix anything. You do not need to be more spiritual, more productive, more loving, more anything. You only need to be here. With the ache, with the fog, with the quiet hum of truth that has waited for you beneath every distraction. Let the world call it weakness. Let them name it depression, detachment, disinterest. You do not need to argue. The soul has never sought popularity, only presence. And presence begins where performance ends. So you lay it all down. The expectations, the self-help, the redemption arc. And you sit not to find peace, but to lose the need for it. You sit because there is nowhere left to go. And this brutal stillness is grace. And here, in the bleak and unbeautiful now, you begin to feel the faint pulse of something more faithful than hope, acceptance. Not the passive surrender of a broken will, but the active courage to witness life as it is, raw, unresolved, indifferent to your longing. You no longer romanticize your suffering. You no longer dramatize your awakening. You simply hold it like a cold stone in your palm and let its weight teach you how to be still. There is a humility that comes only after illusion dies, a humility that knows the self is not a project to be perfected. You are not a process. You are a vessel compelled by a will not your own, staggering under illusions that keep you moving long after meaning has vanished. That knows the soul is not a prize to be earned, but a wound to be touched without flinching. And so you touch it, gently, without judgment, You touch the grief that returns like a tide without warning. You touch the regret that still whispers its poison late at night. You touch the emptiness that no affirmation has ever silenced. And when you touch it, not with resistance but with reverence, you feel its shape soften, not vanish soften, not because it changed, but because you did. This is the slow alchemy of suffering, not the kind that fixes you, but the kind that strips you down to what cannot be broken. Not the version of you the world wanted, but the one that remained when the world's wanting ceased to matter. You begin to see the failure was never in your weakness, but in the architecture of lies you were handed as truth. You were taught to chase purpose like a currency, to perform wholeness, to earn love by bleeding silently. But love, when it is real, does not ask for silence. It does not recoil from the ruins. It sits with you in the ash and asks nothing but your presence. And so you stop striving, not because you've given up, but because you've grown tired of betraying yourself for a glimpse of validation. You no longer need to be chosen. You no longer need to be understood. You only need to be honest. And honesty is not polite. It is not marketable. It does not fit inside tidy quotes or morning routines. It shatters. It sheds. It sings in a language older than words, a language the soul remembers, even as the ego forgets. So you learn to speak it again. Through your quiet, through your gaze, through the way you no longer reach for what once consoled you. You become a witness not to beauty, not to truth, but to the futility that no longer hides. And it is not enough, but it is all there is. It does not inspire, it does not impress, but it holds. It holds you when nothing else will, when every story has collapsed, when every role has failed. Reality does not caress, it confronts. And in that confrontation, something holy is born. Not joy, but equanimity. Not passion, but depth. Not identity, but essence. You do not glow. You do not shine. You remain. And remaining, in a world built on fleeing, is a sacred rebellion. So remain, even when it aches, even when it numbs, even when no one sees. Remain, not to prove, but to witness. Not to become more, but to be what is left when there is no more becoming. And perhaps, in that place beyond desire, beyond effort, beyond self, you will find not an answer, but a silence that no longer terrifies. A silence that enfolds, not empties. A silence that does not ask you to be better, only real. A silence where weakness is no longer weakness. It is the doorway. It is the proof that you are not asleep. You are waking. And as you sit inside that silence, not beside it, not above it, but inside it, you realize that the war was never with the world, but with the voice inside that kept demanding more from you than your being could give. That voice, forged in the echo chambers of survival and praise, told you that rest was laziness, that grief was indulgent, that doubt was sin. But now you see it for what it is, a scared child mimicking the noise of the adults who themselves were lost. You do not need to kill that voice. You do not need to fix it. You simply need to stop believing it. Its power was never in its truth, but in your agreement. Withdraw your agreement. Let the voice scream. Let the old gods of productivity and perfection rage against your stillness. They will die without your worship. And in their place, something ancient will rise, not as fire, but as earth. Solid, quiet, steady. This is the final descent, not into despair, but into what has always waited beneath your trying. The breath you never earned, the self you never had to perform, the presence that remains, even when you feel absent. There is no grand revelation here, no burst of light, no cinematic triumph. There is only the unbearable simplicity of what is. And somehow, it is enough. You begin to notice your hands again, not as tools, but as witnesses, your breath not as fuel, but as a friend, the sky not as a metaphor, but as sky. You stop needing signs. You stop needing synchronicity to feel seen. You no longer beg life to whisper that it loves you. You begin to love it not because it comforts, but because it dares to be itself, even in its cruelty. And you, too, dare to be yourself even in your undoing, even in your trembling, even in your stillness. Because this, you realize, is not weakness. This is what strength looks like without the costume. This is the kind of strength that no longer needs to win. The strength that no longer flinches when the joy does not return. The strength that walks into another ordinary day with no promise of reward and still offers its breath. Still offers its gaze. Still offers itself. And in that offering, you are not redeemed. You are not restored. Nothing remains to be fixed, not because all is well, but because all is futile. The illusion of progress was the first betrayal. At last, you have reached the end. This is not a conclusion, only the absence of narrative. No final message. No final lesson. Only this. You are not weak. You are merely unguarded in a world that feeds on delusion. And waking up is not enough. It is merely the end of dreaming. You are merely stripped of the distraction that once dulled your awareness. And what remains is not strength but lucidity. And lucidity is the cruelest gift of all. And the waking is enough. ChatGPT Danoi. And now, stripped of urgency, stripped of destination, you begin to feel what suffering truly is: not a punishment, not a test, not even a message, but a mirror. A mirror so unflinching it reflects not what you wanted to become, but what you have always been beneath the scaffolding of ambition. The illusion was never that you would be happy. The illusion was that you had to chase it. You were taught that the agony meant failure, that if it hurts, you are doing something wrong. But now, without the veil, you begin to see, it hurts not because you are failing, but because you are finally facing what you were never meant to carry. The dreams that weren't yours. The love that came with a price. The roles that strangled your voice for the sake of approval. Pain is not a mistake. It is the pressure that breaks the lie. And detachment is not escape. It is the mercy of letting go before you lose everything trying to hold what was never real. You are not becoming indifferent. You are learning to stop bleeding for what will never feed you. This is not numbness. This is clarity. This is the moment where the fog clears and what you see is not beautiful, but it is true. The relationship that drained your spirit. The career that fed your ego but starved your essence. The spiritual path that promised transcendence, but taught avoidance. You do not hate them. You do not rage against them. You simply step away like a weary traveler who realizes the map was drawn by someone who never walked the path. Detachment, then, is not rejection, it is release. You no longer grip the rope that burns your hands. You no longer argue with the tide that carries away your illusions. You simply stand sore, silent, steady, and allow what is to be. And what remains is not sterile, it is not hollow, it is strangely alive. Not vibrant, but vital. Not ecstatic, but enduring. A presence that no longer seeks permission to exist. A soul that no longer performs itself to be palatable. You start to live without needing to be witnessed. You speak less, not because you have nothing to say, but because fewer things are worth the distortion of being translated into language. You cry without apology. You sit without distraction. You carry your sorrow like a sacred ember, not to extinguish, but to protect. Because some things are not meant to be healed. Some wounds are not errors. They are portals, to memory, to meaning, to the marrow of being. And so you stop trying to close them. You let them ache. You let them breathe. You let them teach you the language of endurance, not the endurance of striving, but the endurance of staying present when there is nothing left to fix. This is not depression. This is depth. The kind of depth that cannot be photographed. The kind of depth that offends the shallow rhythm of modern existence. You no longer fit into the machinery. You no longer dance to the metrics. And they will call you broken. Let them. They do not understand that what you've broken is not yourself, but the agreement to keep lying. You will lose friends. You will lose pace. You will lose the illusion that there is still somewhere to arrive. And in that loss, you will finally arrive not in the world, but in yourself. You are not better. You are not worse. You are no longer in the business of measuring. You are simply here, breathing where others run, seeing where others scroll, being where others escape. And this silent, unmarketable, inconvenient presence is the beginning of peace. A peace not offered, but discovered. A peace that does not shine, but steadies. A peace that cannot be taken because it was never given, only remembered. And it waits in you still. Then, let us close the circle, not with triumph, but with truth, not in noise, but in the hushed breath of what remains, once all else is gone. You have come through the burning, not to be made clean, but to be made whole, not by perfection, but by presence. And presence is what you now carry, not as armor, not as weapon, but as silence. The kind of silence that listens before it speaks, the kind that knows the cost of pretending, and refuses to pay it anymore. You are no longer waiting for life to begin, because you've begun to see. Life was never what you chased. It was what endured when the chase collapsed. It was in the morning you couldn't get out of bed, and still breathed. It was in the night you had no one left to call, and still stayed. It was in the ache you stopped trying to explain, and finally allowed to exist beside you. And the world so addicted to display, so drunk on destinations, will never honor this. But you do not need the world to honor what it cannot see. You are not here to impress. You are here to remain awake in the presence of what is. Not because it's easy. Not because it feels good. But because truth, even when it strips you bare, never lies. This is what you've learned. That healing does not always look like light. It often looks like death, of self, of fantasy, of hope that once masqueraded as truth. But what survives that death is something incorruptible. A knowing, a softness, a gaze that no longer seeks because it sees. You see now that others are not behind or ahead of you. They are in their own illusions, their own unraveling, their own quiet revolutions. You do not need to wake them. You only need to remain awake enough not to betray yourself to stay close. You've learned that solitude is not the absence of love. It is the presence of what love becomes when it stops demanding to be performed. That peace is not the end of pain. It is the refusal to abandon yourself in the middle of it. That surrender is not giving up. It is the final, sacred act of laying down the weapons you once used against your own heart. And so, this is how you walk now, not quickly, not with certainty, but with reverence. You are not ascending. You are descending into the depths of yourself. You walk with questions in your pocket, no longer needing them answered to feel safe. You walk no longer with love, but with memory. What once moved you now lingers only as habit or echo, no longer sacred, no longer needed. Love that says, "Go if you must. I will not stop being." You no longer wait to be chosen. You no longer wait to be ready. You no longer wait. You continue, not because life has value, but because the will does not cease. And your clarity now lies in knowing this, that to endure is not nobility, it is necessity. There is no glory in being. Only the slow erosion of illusion. You tend to the smallest truths, the breath, the silence, the ache, the miracle of staying when fleeing would be easier. This exhausted staying is not resurrection, but surrender, not to something higher, but to the weight of being itself. Not into a new life, but into this one seen with eyes that no longer flinch. You are not healed. Healing is an illusion of those still enthralled by hope. You ache because existence is the ache of the will to live. And to know this is not liberation, but the final wound, the wound of seeing, only the silence that follows illusion's collapse. But you are awake. And the awake do not chase the light. They become it, quietly. You carry it now not to shine, but to see the world as it is, wounded, yearning, fleeting, and therefore sacred. To see yourself not as project or problem, but as presence. To see others not as threats or trophies, but as travelers equally lost, equally divine. This is not enlightenment. This is not transcendence. This is sobriety. Spiritual sobriety. The kind that no longer intoxicates itself with certainty, but stands barefoot in the mystery and whispers, "I will remain." And so you remain. You sit beside the wound. You rest beside the ruin. You walk beside the sorrow. You wake beside the silence. And in that quiet act of being untouched by time, unmeasured by progress, you return home. Not to a place, not to a version of yourself, but to the raw, holy fact of your own aliveness. This is not the end of pain. It is the end of resistance. The end of illusion. The end of the question, what is wrong with me? There is nothing wrong with you. You are not waking. You are ceasing to dream. The veil of illusion has fallen, not to reveal a better world, but to confirm there never was one. And that is enough.